welcome. We've got a full stage here today. We've got very excited to welcome with us, new on stage is Joy Savill, and we'll do a bit more of an introduction, and then my fellow property graduates, and there's going to be more actually because they're just starting again, aren't they? We've got Wendy Snedden and Hamish as well, Hamish Douglas as well. So welcome, and this is our property networking. So this really is an opportunity for everyone to jump up, ask questions, and we really have got a wealth of knowledge up here on the stage, so do take advantage of it as well. So yes, if anyone saw the title, it's Do You Have a Will? And do you have property peace of mind? Because obviously we think about a will and we all know that we should have one, whether we have one or not. I can't comment. I do, and it is quite a recent one. But there are, maybe situations where you haven't. And as we always love to talk with Joy, she loves to have a chat about death in the most positive of ways. So Joy, I wonder, so Joy is also as a great friend we have mentored and coached alongside each other, and she is a very successful property investor and is possibly one of the most knowledgeable people I know, so I feel really fortunate to have you up here. But Joy, I wonder if you wouldn't mind terribly just giving us a quick intro to yourself.
Yeah, so I've been a property and private client lawyer, so trusts, powers of attorney, wills, all that stuff for many years. I'm not going to tell you how many. And at some point in about the last 20, I decided that clients were making all the money and I wasn't. So I started property investing in 2008. And we have a portfolio of properties now, mainly single lets and HMOs, although we do a bit of development, plan and gain, that sort of stuff as well. Working in conjunction with my daughter-in-law in some parts of the business. We also do, I also then do a bit of property law still. I look at your more difficult cases, shall we say, or in the case the other day, a young solicitor came and asked me to do an unregistered conveyancing transaction because she couldn't do it. Not quite sure what they can do when we all retire. And then I also do estate planning, so I help people get their peace of mind to make sure that everything goes where they want it to go. And on top of that, do a bit of block management as well. So
Wowee, so a very busy lady, as we know, yeah. Joy, very busy, fantastic, but an absolute wealth of knowledge there, so thank you for that. And Wendy, I wonder if you might just give a quick intro, just a reminder of who you are and what you do.
Yeah, so we create spaces for work, rest and play, so primarily serviced accommodation, and we're just moving into apart hotels. And we've been doing this for about 5 years now. So, looking forward to kind of hearing about Joy's experience and learning from what she's got to tell us.
Fantastic. Thanks, Wendy. And I'm going to call you Douglas. Hamish, sorry. Wrong way around. Hamish.
Interchangeable names, yeah.
Exactly. Do you mind introducing yourself, please?
Yeah, okay, so hi, I'm Hamish Douglas, and I'm based around Oxford, and I'm doing a bit of a mix of development and rent to serviced accommodation. I've actually just taken on my second serviced accommodation in Coventry, so going to get that fixed up over the next few weeks and get it out on the market. So yeah, time to expand. I've had some good interest from investors, and I'm starting to get some nice funnel action going for the deals now as well. So yeah, it's looking pretty good. Operating largely around Oxfordshire, but I've got these service accommodations up in Coventry at the moment, hitting into the contractor market up there.
Amazing, I love it. And a little intro into myself, Emma Howitt. I run a pureabodes, and I help property investors grow their wealth through property with ease and joy. which is relevant that we've got Joy on today, because I'm a massive advocate of mindset, because we can have all the mindsets, we can have all the sort of skills and knowledge in the world, but without the mindset, it really does make life very, very difficult. And Joy and I, in fact, are on the mindset journey together, aren't we? I'm actually interviewing Lee, I think it is, tomorrow. Lee and I are going to be doing a monthly mindset property mind. Or mind property, whichever one it is, can't remember. But anyway, so awesome. Well, look, let's jump straight into it, Joy. So obviously, I mean, let's start with the negatives. I mean, what happens if you don't have a will?
That's the hardest thing, and it's one of the things that people make lots of assumptions on. So they make the assumption that that it goes to the person you want it to. So I had a conversation with my brother before he was married. Got married last year on my advice. Was that if you he said, well, everything I've got's going to her, and I said, well, it isn't, is it? Because you're not married to her. And most people, and they've been together 30 years, and so if you don't have a will, it follows your bloodline. It's not a respecter of any relationships you may have. So I've known people who have been chucked out of houses after tragic events. One lady she was a little old bent up lady, the grey hair, and had lived with this chap. She was the housekeeper, and she'd lived with him for 50 odd years, and her family, it was his house, and his family wanted it, and she didn't have any rights to stay there. Just as, another lady I knew watched her then boyfriend run over in front of her on a bike. And as they were leaving the hospital, having made the decision to switch the machine off, his family asked her for the keys to the house. And it's really important, because the people you want to have it might not get it. And in the same vein, you might think, I want my children to have everything. I know somebody who went through their grand's house on drugs in 6 months, a whole lot gone. So I'm sure it didn't all go on drugs, but it went on stupid lifestyle. So, great chance, but a will therefore gives you the ability to say, I don't want this to happen, and I don't want that to happen, and you can set up trusts and make sure that everybody's looked after in a way, and that's the choice. The worst case scenario, of course, is you die and you have no children, and your parents have a taxable estate and you have a taxable estate. Everything gets left to your parents because they're your nearest blood relative, and they pay tax on your estate and then die a few years later and pay tax on it again. So it's really important to make sure you have a will, and the person. One of the things I really don't advocate, a lot of lawyers will go in and say, right, what do you want? And what I usually start with is, tell me what you want and I'll tell you what you can have. Because it's not everybody thinks, they want this, and then what they want it to pass to their spouse and then to their children. But if they die and their spouse gets married again, it won't pass to your children. So you need to make sure that that's sorted out, and you can do that with a good will.
Goodness me, I think it's another one of those things that I didn't know until I started in property, is that you don't know what you don't know, and this is completely another element of that, isn't there? It's so much that you kind of don't know. And also I feel for everyone else, but as soon as money starts to come into play, people change. Maybe they were like that before, but it really kind of accentuates these situations. So as you say, I mean, I know for me that I'm just not into sort of fighting about things, and if it came to it, I would just walk away and let the others have the money, because I'm just not into that awful fighting that can come up. but you do see it happen, and obviously you've seen that, Joy.
Yeah. You can sometimes, I mean, I will often describe myself as the referee, because that's often what I spend my time doing. I can remember sitting in probably one of the worst days. I put it down as one of the worst days of my life, because I could see that were undercurrents in this family that really I didn't want to be in the middle of. And one lot sat down one side of the board table, and the other lot sat down the other side of the board table and just slang abuse at each other. And it was a horrible thing, and that's what happens, you know. That's the first thing is, I want to get this person back, and it doesn't work like that. It just doesn't, you know. There's no point in it, and also people knock on the door the day after death saying, well, give me the money then, because it's mine now. And there's a lot more to do than give you the money.
So is it also that if it's all set up beforehand, then people have an understanding, and it can be shared that this is the route, this is what will have to happen to enable it to all go forward?
The thing with will is that your executors draw their authority from that document. So there's a lot more that can be done. If you haven't got a will, they draw their authority from the grant of letters of administration, which is granted via the court, albeit a rubber stamp exercise, well, to some extent. Obviously, they wouldn't let me go and apply for your probate, but, you know, with the right proof in it. So, yes, from that point of view, it is allowed, you know, it's better to have a will, because you've got authority from day one. You know who's in charge from day one. You don't know that. I mean, I've got a friend of mine's mum died in November 21, and we still don't have the grant of letters of administration. So nobody is officially in charge.
Right.
Which is there's no problems in the family, but if there was, it would be particularly difficult, you know. And so and usually at this place, I say, you know, people have lots of excuses for not doing wills. The probably most embarrassing fact is that my mother died without a will. She refused to talk about it, because if she talked about it, she'd die. She still bloody died. You know, nobody's getting out of it alive. So you know, it's just so important. It's very rare that somebody comes into me and I say, oh, you just want that to that, that's fine. It's an easy will. It's very rare. And they're the ones that you see, you know, the £60 ones you see on the boards in the shop windows. You know, do your will for £60, and they'll suddenly then tell you need a lot of other stuff. So
goodness me. Well, I wonder if we might and do say if not, but we did talk about an example earlier. Wendy, am I allowed to mention it, or?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Do you want to sort of explain your situation? Because I'm sure we've got a few people who are writing in some questions in the comments, but if we sort of cover up a few points first, and then we'll come to the questions as well.
Yes, I guess in my experience, so we produced a will 20 odd years ago when my kids were little, outlining what we wanted to have happen and who was going to care for them, that sort of thing. They're grown up now, they've left home. We've invested in lots of properties and we have businesses now. So I guess we really need to think about updating. And I know I should, and I haven't. And I think I believe it's a big problem for the business if I was to die.
Yeah. Or even if you weren't to die, but you were to become ill.
Yes.
Become ill.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes it a big problem too.
Yeah, because the business would potentially stop trading until all those bank accounts would be frozen until, so it's on my to-do list.
But, so I heard that. So what is it? If you become ill, you become unconscious, and they can have a ruling, or the doctors sort of inform the right people, and then they freeze your accounts. Is that correct?
Yeah. So if they do something called a dole's notice. It's the deprivation of liberties, which sounds a bit draconian, I think, but they report your mind or non-mind, shall we say, to the court protection, who will then protect your assets for you, which means freezing everything.
Yeah.
Freezing everything and letting it all fall apart.
It doesn't do anything to protect your assets. It just stops other people spending them and letting it fall apart. Yeah.
Right.
So what happens there then? So is that a joint thing? So is that a will and a power of attorney, for instance?
A will is not effective until you are dead. You can't take any action on anything until somebody has died. So until you've got your death, in fact, until you've got your death certificate in your hand, you're really not in power. Your will is not set in stone. That's the moment it gets set in stone. Well, not quite, but I won't go there. So you should also have a lasting power of attorney. So that's there are two of those. There's the property and affairs and a health and welfare. I'm sadly old enough to remember when we only had one, which was called an enduring power of attorney, and it only covered property and affairs, what the property and affairs covers. Now, the health and welfare, when it first was invented, or first enacted, the RET Act was enacted, was probably about, I think it's about 15 years ago now. I still think of them as new, but that's an unfortunate side effect of being in the legal profession. You think things are new all the time because they aren't like they were when you started. And we sort of told everybody, oh, they don't need a health and welfare one, it'll be fine. But as doctors have got younger, you know, they have little boys as doctors now and things, they are more keen on you having had a power of both parts, health and welfare. And they are certainly at that point
Oh, I think
Sound went.
they shouldn't do. Sorry, somebody tried to phone. That they shouldn't do. So I think that is certainly a way of thinking. You know, with your powers of attorney, you should do both parts now. Register them. There used to be a school of thought that said, oh, just do them and register them later when you need them. Registration period at the moment is 20 weeks. And some, my opinion is, but so I think probably they're better done, registered, put in a drawer, and wait till later. That gives people to give the power to withdraw treatment should you think they want it. And if you have also become of unsound mind, then that person can give. So we think more of dementia, but there can be all sorts of things. You know, there's early onset stuff, God forbid, but there's also, you know, young people having strokes, having accidents that have damaged their brain in some way. So they then get put within the court protection, and so it's useful to have that document and review it on a fairly regular basis, because it's no good if they're all dead.
Go on. And what about, you know, so thinking about, so we've looked at will. So the will obviously kicks in when you've died. You've got the power of attorney in case you become incompetent or you're very ill or whatever from that side. And how does that compare? So obviously we're talking from a property perspective here, and we're all you know, perhaps doing joint ventures or doing having a business partner and things like that. So obviously I've got a business partner, and we've got quite a detailed partnership agreement, so to speak. So is there kind of a hierarchy that goes down? So if I was to suddenly
the the business, the shareholder agreement will rule for the business assets. So that would always be the case. So but only the business assets. So somebody can't come along with your power of attorney and go, I don't want that to exist anymore. So that will always have for that. But for the rest of your life, the powers of attorney are more applicable. I like to think that in a shareholder agreement, there's something that happens when you're dead. But that isn't always the case because people don't like talking about it. But there should be something, because you could end up with unwittingly with a business partner that you really don't want.
Yeah, like the other person's partner or something like that. Yeah. And what do you think of kind of the there are insurances, aren't there? So you can have a sort of you can have things in place, and then I know the one that we're keen on is the one where if one of us dies, neither of us, no disrespect, we really like the other person's partner, but as we said, we went into business with each other. So if anything were to happen at that stage, it's having an insurance that buys the other person out, so to speak.
Yes, yeah. And to be fair, that's probably the best way to do it, because it would be more, the other person is going to be really hurting if their partner's died. Not that you aren't, but they're probably not in any they're not capable of coming into the business and doing anything, even if that was their thing. They're still not capable of it. I think is a lot. It's like picking up a story halfway through, isn't it? You can't, you haven't got all the nuances in that maybe you need. So but that insurance should not be in the benefit of the estate of the deceased. So you should be in your case, you should be insured to get your business partner's proceeds, and the agreement should be in the shareholder agreement. And if it's a limited company, it could equally be the limited company can be the beneficiary of the insurance. But what you don't want is the deceased person being the benefit of the insurance, because it goes into their estate and is therefore inheritance tax is payable. So you want it to pass outside their estate.
Okay, and this kind of, I suppose, goes into what advice would you give, somebody who is, so let's say, for instance, like Wendy, so obviously she did a will a while ago now, and then needs to come back to it. And there's now so many things. I mean, you've spoken about a lot of stuff, which is quite a bit of jargon. What would you advise? Who should we go and look to? And then obviously the fact that we're in property as well. I know that we've had conversations, and then I've gone and spoken to a chap that I know that does wills, and there's a bit of conflicting information because obviously they come from it from a generalist, and we come from it from a very much a specialist. So what kind of advice would you give people, going off and looking to either do a will or redo a will? Or who should they speak to, and should they be property professionals?
I do wills, but I can't do everybody's in properties will. But it would. I'm more than happy to talk to people and set up somebody else to do their will. So I'm happy to do it on a consultancy basis if they've got a lawyer and they want to understand how it's more applicable to their property. But you've got to look at the whole person, and I really think that it's not fair that some people go, well, what do you want? Just do it, because you need to get to know the person very well. And ask them questions that you probably think, I don't really know that. I did a will for somebody as a friend's dad as a favour, and he had not talked to me about, I know how many children he has, and he hadn't talked to me about his younger son. And I got to the end of it and I said, what's Brian's date of birth and what's his address? And he said, I ain't leaving him anything. I said, I know you're not. But I knew he was there. So you have to discount that in the will. And some people don't tell you. I stood in, I was working with another couple, And he said, what about kids that are not in your marriage? Something like that. And I sort of laughed and said, if you've got any other kids, you need to come clean now. Laughing, see, thinking this was, and he looked at his wife and he said, how old's that one? And he did have another child outside the family. And had he not have told me, I couldn't discount that. And you only get that by talking to somebody, and often lawyers don't see it like that. I see it more as a holistic approach, because there's no point if I don't know, you know. And I will ask questions like, do you trust your kids? You know, and do you think they're right? And are they the trustworthy ones? And all sorts of things like that. Not because I'm nosy, but because I don't want to give somebody advice that says, oh, just let your children be executors. If you discover they're robbing, thieving, you know, and I can give you examples in my family. I wouldn't dream of letting them be executors. And I will happily tell you who they are. I'm not going to tell you now, but when I'm in a meeting with somebody, I will happily tell you who I wouldn't let be my executor, because I wouldn't trust them as far as I could throw them, because I wouldn't think they'd do it. And we have to be that honest when we think about it, because otherwise they won't do it.
Goodness.
So Joy, I mean, as someone who has thought a lot about, you know, taking out a will, but hasn't done so yet. I mean, I've got my reasons. Partly is I am single and I don't have kids, so you know, the idea of who I leave it to is a bit more complicated. But what would I do? I would book an appointment to come and see you.
Yeah.
To your office, and then
generally do it. I generally do mine on Zoom.
Okay.
I can meet you if you're local. I go and meet you. If you're not, I will do it on Zoom. And then we have a chat. I make some suggestions, and send you a form. Now we can do two ways. I can do a report. Or I'll just send you a form, say fill it in, and if you send it me back, I'll do your will. And I'll open the file and ask you for some money at that point. If you want a report, I'll do a 4 or 5 page report explaining what I think you should do, what you should have, and then that's paid for, and then I'll give you a discount if you decide to go for a will. But no more than an informal chat is a bit difficult to be doing free. Otherwise, I'd spend all my days doing an informal chat with people. So yeah, you get a diary link, make an appointment with me, and then we go from there. So
and then so what? Then I would need to provide you with information about who all my
I send you the form, because I could sit here taking all that information, but I might as well take it from you. You might as well fill it in, basically, and then I can then take it directly when I start to make sure it gets the spellings done. Although somebody recently, I couldn't read their writing at all, which is not usual for me. But they were unfamiliar names as well. So, what
would happen then with Hamish if, you know, so currently he doesn't have a will, and you know, God forbid something happens? So who would it go to currently?
Are your parents still alive?
Yeah.
So it would go to his parents. If they weren't alive, it would go
be split. My parents are divorced, so would it be split amongst them? Or
yes, okay. yeah, equally. And if they've got, that's earlier, as I said, if their estate is taxable, then they'll pay tax again when their end comes. It's a difficult one. If you haven't got parents alive, it's siblings if you haven't got any children. And I've got a family member at the moment who is has just been contacted by an heir hunter who has found her from, I can't get this right, because they go back up the chain. If you've seen the programme, they found her from, it's her mother's uncle's daughters. Yes, her mother's No, it was longer than cousins. They weren't cousins. I think it was their mother's cousin's daughters or something, like really long way up the chain before it came back down again, and the money will come to them.
Right.
They do get it occasionally. People do turn up occasionally.
We recently lost my father-in-law, and about 5 or 6 years ago, he sat my husband and my husband's brother down, and with a solicitor, and they wrote the will. They became the executors. He was really clear about who was to get what, and it was great. So when it happened last month, it just made life really easy for us to. He prepaid his funeral. He'd even written his eulogy. So it was, it just made life, and it made me think now, actually, I need to do something similar to make life easier for my kids.
Yeah, I mean, I can help with prepaid funerals, and I'll often do that for elderly folk who've gone into a home and things like that, because it makes life so much easier.
Yeah. What he didn't do was, so he's left his house to my husband and his brother. There is a sister who's not getting very much for various reasons, but that's all been made clear. But what he didn't do was put the house in the boys' names. So the house is now gone into probate, and we're expecting it still to take about 6 months.
Yeah,
but we could do anything.
Although that said, it's better not to do that. So if you put it into your husband's name, your husband would then potentially have a capital gains tax liability. So it's and it doesn't get round inheritance tax. So it's sort of it's not a very good win situation. Yeah. So everybody who's got a reasonable size estate goes through probate. It depends how long it takes. It can take an enormous amount of time, and I had one recently that took a fortnight. It took us a while to get the stuff collected in, because it always does, because you're reliant on banks. But he'd also left his estate very tidy because he hadn't got loads of banks. He'd streamlined everything, and then from there, that had all gone in.
Okay, so if he had put the house in the boys' names, then we would have been liable for capital gains. So does that mean we won't have to pay capital gains if we sell the house?
Yes,
because it's part of the estate.
Yeah, yeah, because it will. You may not have paid inheritance tax, but it's the allowance is nil rated, so it's considered to be paid, if you like. So yes, you won't. Unless there's a big blip, the estate sometimes gets to pay capital gains tax. Isn't that lovely? But that's, they want to get it everywhere, don't they? So
yeah. So in terms of protecting, thinking about protecting my generation, the next generation for us, we shouldn't put our property in our kids' names then. No. Okay, that's interesting. I'd never recommend that. Never. It's not something I think makes any sense at all. It doesn't save you from inheritance tax. It might save you from getting a grant of probate, but because it's a life, because it's a life interest, you still have to declare it as probate, as an interest in inheritance tax. So it doesn't get around that. It doesn't. It makes it just as difficult, and somebody else having a house may potentially then have to pay capital gains tax. So I wouldn't. And then all the other issues, like if your children go bankrupt, it becomes matrimonial property. There are all those issues that you've got your children on the house you live in. They, God forbid, get brain damaged and put under the core protection. It's or they die. All those things are not. I'm not. I mean, some people say put it in a trust, put the house in a trust so that everybody. I'm not a fan of that.
I think it costs a lot of money. And
Joy, because that was one of the questions I was going to ask. Can you kind of elaborate on what exactly that means to put property into, or assets into trust?
The property, if you haven't, don't have a mortgage on it, you can put you can put the property into a trust, which is drawn up by. It's not something I do. I would pass it to a colleague, because he's much better than me at that sort of trust work. Not always more experienced, shall I say? But I always try and stop people going against that, because you lose control of your property. And if you need to get some money, maybe to do an equity release, you won't be able to do it. And it costs a lot of money. We're talking sort of 30,000-40,000 to put it in.
Right.
And so you've got to be saving a lot of inheritance tax before you do that, to consider doing it. And you will get away with inheritance tax in that thing, in that case, but not, when you think the nil rate bands all added together are £1 million if you've been married, 500 if you haven't. If you're not going to pay tax, then doing all that stuff just to avoid a grant of probate is probably not, is a bit false economy, really.
Okay.
And following on from that, because I'm aware of time, we've got lots of questions to get through. So we never want to avoid, but can we be inheritance tax efficient?
Yeah, well, you can't avoid, yes, we can, but not in death. So inheritance tax is avoided in life, not in death. There's one of my favourite quotes was by, I think it was Roy Jenkins, when he was the Labour Chancellor of the Exchequer, and he introduced inheritance tax from the death duties and the previous. And he said inheritance tax is a voluntary levy paid by people who distrust their family more than they dislike the inland revenue.
Wow.
So yes, but you need to do it in life, and using, as property investors, using things like LLPs and smart companies and all that sort of stuff will limit your liability. But if I was to say, I'd say you ought to pay a little bit, because it keeps them off your back. But if you're if you can keep your estate under the £1 million and you've been married, then do so. Because then you won't have anything to pay. And that's ways of avoiding owning stuff in life, like having income only shares in your limited company and no capital and growth shares and things like that.
Fantastic. Well, look, I know I've got loads more questions, but I'm just aware that we've got quite a long list of questions. So I want to get those answered, otherwise we'll never get through them. But Robin, I'm trying to invite you up on stage. If you wanted to come up and ask your question, but I'll get going. So Robin said, interesting discussion. I'm 26 and wills are something that I've been heavily looking into. I'm not sure where to start. I do have life insurance in place, but no clear plan of action. Should the reaper knock? Gosh, that's very good. And he says, I have a long-term partner, property and children, but not yet married. Our property ownership is under tenants in common rather than owned jointly. Any thoughts on that for Robin?
Yeah. First thing I would consider is what is the size of your estate? If you're not married, you can't make use of the wonderful tool of spousal exemption. So if you die and your estate is taxable, so if you die and you leave your house to your partner, which would be the expectation, you will have to pay income tax on everything over 325,000. Inheritance tax, not income tax, on everything over 325,000, and that will need to be paid immediately. So if you've got a fairly sizable property portfolio, you're going to be selling some of it to pay the tax off, but you can't pay the tax off till you can get the grant of probate. And then, of course, in that situation, there are people limited. Reading between the lines on that one, I would imagine your partner can get the grant of probate, because if children you have are under 18, she is the guardian of them. So she as the guardian of the children under 18, but she will need to appoint another trustee. I am about to come up. I can't believe how quick it's gone, but I'm about to come up to the end of my period of being a trustee with my niece, because her partner died without having a lasting, without having a will, and she needed to appoint somebody else as trustee. So that we did that, but you're stuck with it for a long time.
So the only way to get around that is to actually marry your partner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I used to have people saying, "Oh, I ain't getting married. And I've had 4 or 5 get married in the last 3 or 4 years, because you add up the amount of tax due, because that's one of the things we would look at when we were talking, is what the value of your assets are and what your insurances is, and work out roughly how much the tax payable would be today. As I usually say, yesterday when you die, because I don't killed you off then, you've been already dead. But you then work out how much tax you have to pay, and that has to be paid on the first death. If you're not married. If you are married, you can use spousal exemptions, and then you leave your nil rate bands to your partner. So they get your 500,000 if you're leaving your property. But a lot of us property investors don't actually live in the houses we own, for varying reasons. We're on an option or whatever, because we wanted somewhere bigger, or we've decided to rent. In that case, you don't get the extra 175,000 residential nil rate band, because you have to live in the house that you're leaving to the person to qualify for it, and you also have to leave it to a direct descendant. So if you're not leaving it to your spouse, if you're leaving it to your partner, they aren't your direct descendant. So you're not entitled to use it, or you're not living in it. So you haven't got that allowance anyway. I think that might change.
So that's a very interesting one, and in fact I have questioned a young gentleman, in fact, who we both know, Joy. I'm not going to mention any names. And he's very adamant about not getting married, even though there was a lot of property there. And his view is that there's a 50-50 chance of divorce, no matter how one goes into it. So is there a benefit cost in compared to cost out? Because is it kind of cost in the fact of, you've got to be sure that you're going to be half the ones that stay married, because of the cost out could be more than that? Or
I'm interested into why people think that they're not going to get away with a cost. So if they've got children together, it could lose stuff anyway, because it changes how the courts view the maintenance arrangement. So he's not going to be able to walk away with all his property portfolio, because they could give the house to his partner. So you might just as well be married. In fact, I think it puts you on a better and an even ground.
Interesting. Well,
yeah, so my son and his girlfriend, they have a little boy together, and they're not interested in getting married yet, but I can now see that there might be a conversation to be had about protecting. They're about to buy a house together. At the moment, they live in the house that my son bought. So they might ought to think about the benefits of getting married.
Yeah, because it's all very well saying, yeah, all right, it's annoying, you might lose, but I've had people who've they've got interests under trust. A former secretary of mine got half of her partner's house under a trust. She wasn't on the deeds, because she'd done things and done work and had really, so she took him to court because he kicked her out. I gave her a deposit to buy her new house.
Wow. Okay, let's whip through some of these questions. So I think we may have answered it for Bridget, but if you would like to jump up, let me see if I can't even find Bridget now. But let's answer the questions. Bridget, do raise your hand if you are here. Says, can they freeze joint accounts? I know we mentioned this earlier. And is there a difference between a joint account and account with second signatory? So I don't know if that's two things. So if it's, let's do joint account as if it was husband and wife.
If it's husband and wife,
and then as
account, yes, they can freeze it. And I have apocryphal tales, I say. I'm not sure that this does, but it's been done. In fact, I did actually act for somebody who was buying her own house because her husband had been knocked off his motorbike on the way home from work. And I was acting for her because she had to buy him out via the court of protection because she wanted to move on with her life. So yes, they can.
And if that was going back to the original discussion we have, if that's a joint account, as far as, you know, like a business joint account, that's where you'd need the protection. Is it from a, you know, a partnership agreement or a JV agreement?
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Otherwise, the survivor could end up with the whole of the money. And the second, I believe it to be different for a second signatory account because they're not joint. But I am not certain. And I also know that it depends on the bank. Some banks are very helpful with the second signatory thing, allow it to happen. And some banks just don't get it and won't. So HSBC are really inflexible on that. They won't let you have access to anybody's account, whether you've got powers of attorney or not.
Interesting.
They just discount it unless they've changed in the last few years. But I don't believe they have because I think they're getting also they don't allow that. Yeah.
Okay, so moving on to Scott. I know we touched on this, but Scott said, so a trust is probably the safest place, possibly the safest place, exclamation mark, question mark.
It depends on the safest place for what, because yes, you can
we're talking property. Let's talk property.
Yeah, and you can put everything in it, but I would say a limited company is the safest place. But you can't do that with your residence. Putting it in a trust doesn't always make it the safest place because you've lost control of it. And at what stage do you think, it's the right time to do that? Because if it becomes matrimonial property and suddenly you have a son-in-law or a daughter-in-law attacking your property because they want their share of it, you ain't going to be very happy.
Goodness me. Okay, so we've got some more coming in. Alison has said, I advise my mother not to leave me in her will as I have a problem with leaving my estate. My mother has revoked my dad's will and put his share of their property in a joint trust in hers and my name to pass to me on her death. I have no idea of the implications of this.
No, that's all right. Because she owns up. We've done that in my family. I've done that for family, and it works quite well. And that's I think that's something I would advise. You don't have to have it put in your name. You could have a restriction on it in your name, but because it's another owner, there's no capital gains tax to pay on it. And if it's drafted and shown properly, which I'm sure it will be, because there's talk of revocations and I assume declarations of trust or will trusts or whatever, then you're not entitled to it till the joint owner dies. Therefore, that's when your capital gains liability starts, not finishes. Okay.
Bridget said, this is all horrifying. Well, all I can say is, again, it's one of those things, isn't it, that you don't know what you don't know. And certainly I spend quite a bit of time with Joy and then another estate planner, and I mean the stories that come up, and especially I spent I think it was 3 years getting my mother-in-law to sign the power of attorney with her with my husband, and he's the sole child, and like they have the most fantastic relationship. He does absolutely everything for her. She knows that, but somebody had said one thing to her that was negative about the power of attorney, and she wouldn't do it. She just thought everyone was against her, and it was just such a worry that you know, potentially that could have gone to the government, or we couldn't have even had her home for Christmas. That's what I kept saying. If she loses her marbles, we've got a chance that if the doctors say that, you know, this is what we think, we couldn't have her for Christmas. It's like, you know, I think we can, you know, with the doctor's support, make the best decisions for these people.
Turkey would be better for Christmas, though.
I agree. Oh, quick, let's go through some more questions. So Robin has said, thanks so much. Presumably this is the same effect if your partner is also director with the company.
Yes, you need to be careful, yeah, because if you've got a lot of assets in your company, we're whacking up the value of their shares and therefore whacking up the inheritance tax bill.
Yeah, okay. Bridget has said, has anyone written a book? So Joy, maybe you should. Has anyone written a book on legacy for property folk?
It's written. It only ever got as far as the editing, so it's now being padded out. But I haven't looked at it for ages. It's called Two Certainties.
Get on with it. Come on, we all need it.
I know.
Come on, you've got to get yours done before mine, because I'm not even a quarter of a way through mine yet.
Well, I'm up to I've had somebody read it and they've put comments in, and I've started to fill in gaps. But it's time that I need, and I need to cut loose some stuff to
yeah, so
create that vacuum so that I can fill it.
Shaquille has said use ChatGPT to fill the gaps. I can definitely agree with that. Scott has said, thanks Joy, oh so joyful. Scott, we love that. I'm sure you've heard it before. Appreciate your points, thanks. And then lots of thumbs up from Bridget. I love that. I just wanted to touch on, so I know that you've got now I've lost my place. Oh, here we are. Your legacy locker. So could you tell us a little bit about that? Because that's something that I'd never heard of before and sounds really interesting.
So I'm about to launch, and there's a link. Emma's got a link somewhere where you can register interest, but it's a service called Legacy Locker, which allows you get an hour with me or somebody like me a year. We drill everything. We review your will at the same time, make sure, and your power of attorney. We look at all your property portfolio, work out your inheritance tax liability that year, and make sure that all the things are up to date, all your account numbers, when everything's going to run out on your mortgage deals and everything like that, so that we have all the information in one place. Then if something terrible happens, whether that be death or something else, your nearest and dearest will get an hour or two with me, where we'll go through everything, and then they can decide how they want that to go. Now, and then one of my other companies will take on consultancy and help them run the property portfolio until they're confident. Or help them sell it, but that means that we'll know everything about the property portfolio, your bank accounts, your businesses. If you've got it's little things like if you've got like Emma, you've got an apart hotel. Who runs your broadband? Who runs your?
Don't know, but it's blooming expensive.
Exactly. But how's that going to be kept going if you don't know? Who runs your electric? How are those people, the people you love the most, going to get to know how to do that? Because we all haven't got business partners, and how's that going to work for them? So that's part of that's the service. So we've got a link. We're taking registrations. We're hoping to launch in the next month or two.
Amazing. Well, let's have some comments, guys. Does that sound interesting? Certainly does to me. because that's one of the things why I use any of these kind of, you know, companies made simple and LastPass, because I'm just, you know, through history of having lost everything and never knowing where anything is, and to have that reiteration on, you know, where you're at as far as your portfolio is, and because it sounds like you're going to catch, it's almost like you're going to nip something in the bud, rather than sort of 10 years later looking back and thinking, oh, I you know, had I just thought of a different direction.
Wendy's just said her father-in-law's died. She's naturally very upset about that. If she comes and talks to me, if he may be a joint venture partner with her, she may have completely forgotten about that, i.e. they own the house in joint names or something like that, or there's a loan outstanding. But ditto, there might be somebody else in her past that isn't there. So at least, you know, particularly if you've got lots of joint venture partners, it's an ever-moving feast, knowing where that is and who's got that. You know, and if you change it in the year and you remember, you can email me, but I know people won't do that. They won't email you, they won't change it, so you've got to sit and grill them.
So it's basically, it's like a yearly accountability, isn't it? Just getting, because if we don't have it, like I'm the same, like I have an accountability once a week. You know, when I don't have it, I don't do those things as much. It's just a natural thing, isn't it? But look, we're coming to the last couple of minutes here, Joy. So I know you do lots and lots of, you literally are so multi-talented. I think you also do a bit of mentoring as well, don't you? Where can people find you if they want to come and, you know, find out a bit more about you and
off days and things like that? So if anybody needs just one deal, to talk through one deal and do that, I do that sort of thing as well. Yeah. So making sure you're all the deal structured correctly and things.
Fantastic. So any sort of last sort of thoughts? I mean, I'm interested to hear sort of, Wendy, has that sort of made you feel from hearing from Joy?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think it sounds like everyone needs to sit down and look at each situation has to be looked at independently. There isn't a one size fits all will writing service, is there? No. Everyone's lives are complicated and all of that needs to be factored in. It isn't just a case of the house goes there, the money goes there. So I think that's been really interesting, and yeah, I'll have to have a think about the different ways of pulling things together.
Amazing. And then Hamish, who I don't know if I'm allowed to advertise, clearly is a very eligible bachelor here. So, you know, I don't know why he hasn't been snapped up. And then we wouldn't have all these issues, would we? If anyone wants to see, we are actually live on Facebook, and Hamish, I can say, is a very good looking and terribly lovely chap. So
you're making me blush.
I'm sure the ladies will be lining up. So but yeah, was that interesting for you, Hamish?
Yeah, no, really interesting. It's I mean, it's something I've thought about for years. I just never got around to it. I always thought, oh well, it's not really appropriate for me. But now I'm growing the business a bit more. I feel it is something that I really need to start thinking about a lot more, because you know that I don't really want to pay HMRC a lot of money, and you know when I could be helping out family members at least.
Amazing. Okay, guys, well look, I am going to say a huge thank you to Joy. You've been absolutely fantastic, and guys, can you all just give me a wave if that's all right? Fantastic. And we are going to end the room, so thanks so much, guys. And this is going to be going up onto YouTube, and then we split it out by questions as well. So if you wanted a quick you know, just a quick feedback on what Joy said about certain questions, then we will split that up, and that'll be done by the end of the week. But again, thank you so much to Joy. We really appreciate your time. Thank you, Wendy, and thank you, Hamish, for joining us. And next week is still school term, isn't it? So yes, and in fact I do have an amazing person next week. Who have I got? Oh, Martin Rapley is on next week. He is fantastic, talking all about doing refurb projects, or build projects. He is incredibly knowledgeable, so we'll look forward to seeing him then. Okay, guys, thank you so much. Have a great week.
Bye.
Bye.